money. If you know, you know. If you know, you know. If you know, you know. I can't explain. I can't explain. You know, if you've been to Vipassana, then you already know everything I'm gonna say in this video. But I mean, I'm gonna say it anyways. I have my own things to add. You know, I have my own 2 cents to add. So let me start. Let me start. Okay. We all know that death is a thing. Like, we all know that death is a real thing that is going to happen, that is happening, that is going to happen and is happening all the time around us everywhere. Every single year, the seasons teach us about death and rebirth. Every single year, things change. Nothing's permanent. And we all know at an intellectual level, as soon as you're a child, you learn that, okay, if I squeeze an ant in a specific way, it's going to die. If I squeeze a bug in a specific, it's going to die. If I pull out some grass or a flower from the ground, I'm killing it. Like, we all know from childhood, at an intellectual level, we all understand and know the concept of death and know the concept of impermanence. And then as you get older, like as an adult, we all know even better. Like, we know very well at an intellectual level that death is a thing that happens. It's a thing that happens, and it's a thing that can't be avoided. And we also know that nothing is permanent and that things are constantly always changing. Like, we know this at an intellectual level again. However, when someone dies or when things change, it still hurts us deeply and we still feel miserable and suffering. And I'm not here to tell you that that's wrong. I'm not here to tell you that that's wrong and not okay and that you shouldn't feel those things. No, like, it's very human, very natural, very normal to feel sad or feel suffering or misery when people or things or situations die or end or change. But there's like a level of intensity that we experience, and the intensity is what I am really curious about, because at the end of the day, like, grief is a thing. Like, grief is a thing and it will always be a thing, and there's nothing really that you can do to rid yourself of grief. Grief is honestly the human condition. If the biggest universal law is that nothing is permanent and things are constantly changing and that death is a thing, like, if the number one thing that you learn is that death is a thing, then as a human, then the human condition is grief. The human condition is all the experiences that come with grief. So there's a level of intensity again, like when we experience endings, when we experience breakups or life changing or quitting your job or getting fired from your job or graduating from school or a death in the family or someone close to you. There's a level of intensity to the emotions that come with these huge endings that we experience and that we're meant to experience as humans. And it's always interesting when, let's say, you're going through a breakup or the end of a relationship, or not you, but just in general, when we experience these big endings or changes, there's emotional intensity that comes with it. And everyone's going to experience that intensity in different ways. And that's not to mean that one person's grief is more intense than the other person's grief, or one person's feelings are more intense than another person's feelings. However, you know, once you do experience the death of a close loved one, and someone specifically that you're living with, that you've lived with, that's lived in your home, because I feel like as a kid or as a young person, like, yeah, your grandparents may die, your cousin, your aunt, your uncle, people die around you, and it's still an experience to experience those deaths. But unless someone was actually living with you, like unless it's someone that you were living with, and some people live with their grandparents or their aunts or their uncles, etc., etc. But when it's someone that you were actually living with in a real way, you woke up and you expected to see them, you ate meals with them, they were in your home living, you were living with someone, and then that person dies, it is a different type of experience of intensity because you were living with someone and now that person is no more. And now the only experience you can have with that person is an experience in your memory, is an experience of your mind, because that person is no more. You are no longer living with them. And you can't, even if you wanted to. So that's a certain kind of intensity of like the death of a close family member, a parent, a sibling, a close family member you were living with. That's a different kind of grief and intensity that is very intense. It can be very, very intense. And that can create a lot of grief, prolonged grief within us in our own human experience when that intense grief happens. And until you experience the death of somebody that you were living with or somebody that you were meant to have in your life, like a parent, until you experience that, you don't really understand the real intensity of grief. And I say this as somebody who does have a dead father. You don't really understand, And so once that happens, you go through life differently. You do go through life differently because you know what that intense grief actually is like. And there's a level of intensity to like that intense grief can also be felt through the end of a relationship, through a breakup, a heartbreak, through a friendship breakup, through losing a job or graduating. Like those big life changes or endings can still bring up intense feelings of grief for people. So it's really interesting that different people, maybe somebody who doesn't have that experience with the death of a living family member or someone that like was really close to them, whether that's a friend or anything, like somebody who doesn't have that experience with that intense grief of somebody that was close to you, that you know they may feel those intense feelings of grief similar, like that similar intensity in things like a breakup and whatnot. And so, it's nobody's business to tell somebody else that the intense grief that you're experiencing, you shouldn't experience. It's nobody's business because we experience intensity at the level of our own life experiences, So for us, for the person, for the individual, if the most intense grief you've ever felt was a heartbreak, then that heartbreak is going to be really intense and it's going to be hard to cope and to process and to handle that grief because you haven't experienced the grief of, let's say, a parent dying, And at the same time, sometimes the death of a heartbreak or the experience the death of a relationship can feel just as intense as the grief that comes from a parent dying, you know? So it's all relative. Grief is relative. All feelings of intensity are all relative. You know, for somebody who's extremely disabled, that pain that they experience in their body may be so much more tangibly intense than the pain that somebody who is perfectly able-bodied and is very used to having a non-hurting body, maybe they roll their ankle and they're taken out for a whole week, but their ankle is not even sprained, it's just rolled, but they're taken out. Two people experiencing two different types of intensities, yet maybe feeling the same, or two people feeling different levels of pain, yet for both of them it may feel the same intensity, you know? So the pain that we experience is completely relative to our own life experiences and the things that we have to compare them to. So that's something that's like important to also understand when it comes to pain and grief. Okay, but until you experience the death of somebody that you were living with, like that is a different kind of intensity that does reframe all the grief that you will experience in your life and how the weight that it all holds, you know? And at the same time, experiencing that intense grief of the death of somebody that you were living with or the death of somebody that was close to you doesn't mean that you're an expert at impermanence, doesn't mean that you're an expert at grief. Because the thing with grief and the intensity that is relative to our own life experiences, it's also relative to how attached we were to that person. You know, the death of somebody who was dying from a long-term illness may feel very different than the death of somebody who died by suicide. These things feel very different they could feel very different. These things could feel very different for an individual because on one hand, and that doesn't mean that the grief is any different or that one grief is better or worse than the other. No, nothing like that. But it's different because on one hand, you had at least an expectation that, okay, this person may not be here for much longer because they're going through an illness versus the surprise of a suicidal death. And why is that? Why is that difference a thing? Because we got the opportunity perhaps to face our attachment to people, which brings me to my second point of attachment and how attachment impacts the intensity of grief. When we're attached to anything, we unknowingly or unexpectedly are signing a contract of suffering. Whenever we have an attachment to anything, anyone, anything, we're signing a contract of our own suffering. Because if I'm attached to something, then what happens when I cannot have that thing that I'm attached to? Suffering. Because when you're attached to something and then you no longer have the thing that you're attached to, you will suffer. You will suffer. No doubt about it. No escaping it. You will suffer. Okay? Because it's that attachment that brings the actual misery, that brings the actual suffering. And what do I mean by this? Okay. Let's say you're in a relationship and you're attached to that person being in your life. You want that person to be in your life. You're craving for that person to be in your life. One day that person will not be in your life, whether it's by that relationship no longer existing or no longer being viable for you to exist in, or death. So that attachment to that relationship, you're signing a contract that, okay, this person will no longer be in my life, and you're signing the contract of your own suffering, of your own misery, because you have that attachment. That's an attachment of craving. That's an attachment of wanting, right? Now there's also the attachment of not wanting, the attachment of, I don't want this, aversion. Okay, let's say you have fear that the relationship would end. That fear, that fear is also an attachment. Let's use another example. Let's say you have shame. Let's say you have shame, right? Let's talk about shame. What it's something that people have shame with sex. Okay, so let's say you have any shame around sex. That shame is also an attachment because you're attaching yourself to a narrative of like, okay, sex is a thing that makes me feel this way. I have shame around it, and because I have shame around it, I don't want to experience certain things, or I don't want to share certain things. So that attachment, that shame, is the attachment of one day you will experience shame in any regard. But we're talking about sex. One day you will experience shame with sex. And so when you experience that shame, you will suffer because that's exactly what you didn't want. Okay, scratch all of that actually. So let me tell you a story. I went on a beautiful trip in Turkey with some lovely people. It was a retreat. It was like a slowness. It was like a slow. I went to Turkey a few years ago on a lovely, lovely, like slow. I went to Turkey a few years ago on like a lovely, lovely retreat. It was like a slowness residency. It was called Slow Residency, put up by Hitomi Machizuki on YouTube, and then also her two friends, Rank and Reese. And it was an amazing retreat, and we like took a boat ride, and we landed on like this little beachy island thing, and I found a beautiful rock that was like literally in the shape of an eye. I found this rock in the shape of an eye, and I was like, oh my gosh, this rock is amazing. It's like giving me intuition. Like, I love this rock so much. I put this rock on my altar for like a whole year, and then I took this rock on my travels to India. And I loved this rock so much. And when I was in India, I had this rock with me, and I had it in my pocket of my pants. And then I gave my pants away to be washed. And the rock, I forgot the rock inside, and I lost the rock. I lost the rock. And I called them, the washing clothes people in India, and I was like, did you see my rock? And they didn't they did not care at all. I'm sure they probably were laughing at me. What is this Westerner telling me to look for a rock in my washing machine? I'm not going to look for any. I don't think they even looked for it when I asked them to, But I was so sad. I cried. I was so sad that I lost this rock that had so much memories for me, and it symbolized things for me. I was so sad that I lost this rock, because I was attached to it and what the rock represented. I was so attached to it. The bigger the attachment, the bigger the misery, because at the end of the day, it was just a rock. It was just a rock. Imagine crying over a rock. As much as that rock like represented all these amazing people and this amazing experience and my intuition and blah, 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 blah. At the end of the day, it was just a rock. It was just a rock, and it made me cry when I lost it because I was attached to it. The bigger the attachment, the bigger the misery. There's so many rocks everywhere, but I lost that one rock and it made me cry. The bigger the attachment, the bigger the misery. Okay, so you might understand death at an intellectual level. You may understand that things are not forever at an intellectual level, but when you attach to something and you're like, I want to have this thing, I need to have this thing, I want, it's mine, that mine attachment, this is mine, this body is mine, these glasses are mine, this camera is mine, this microphone is mine. That attachment, the bigger the attachment, the bigger the misery. So that's the attachment of craving. I want this. It's mine. I want it. It's dangerous. There's also the attachment of aversion. Aversion is also attachment. I don't want this. I don't want this pain. I don't want this idea. I don't want this. Anything that you don't want is also an attachment of aversion. For example, like we're talking about death. Let's talk about death. Okay, I have a fear of, let's talk about that. Let's say what's something people are scared of. I am scared that this relationship will end. I'm scared that this relationship will end. Me being scared is unnecessary, but the fear is there. The fear is what will make me hurt more and be more miserable when the relationship ultimately ends, because ultimately the relationship will end, whether it's through a breakup, whether it's through death. Ultimately, the relationship will end, and my attachment to the relationship and my fear of that relationship ending is exactly what's going to bring me more pain, more misery, more suffering. Equally, sometimes we're angry, right? Let's feel this let's explore this anger. Okay, let's explore this anger. At a certain point, let's say we're angry because somebody did something. Why would someone doing something make us angry? Let's think about that for a second. How is it that somebody else has the ability to impact me to the point where somebody else can make me angry? Aha. Because we have an expectation. We're not actually angry with whatever the person did. No. We think we're angry because somebody did something to make us angry, but then we have to remember and realize that we are the only ones responsible for our own emotions. The only person that's responsible for you experiencing a feeling in your body, because remember, a feeling is something that you feel in your body. Anger comes as like a heat. Sometimes it comes as a heat on the head. Sometimes it comes as a tightness in your fist that makes you want to clench it. Sometimes it comes as a tightness in your stomach. Sometimes it's a heat all over your torso and your core. This anger comes not because somebody did something to make us angry, because nobody can make us feel anything in our body. This anger comes because we had an expectation of somebody that was not fulfilled. So let's say I expect somebody, let's say my friend, I expect my friend to treat me with respect. So the day that they don't treat me with respect, I get angry. But I don't get angry because they disrespected me. I got angry and let me give you another example. Let's say you go out on the street, and I'm a black person, right? I'm a black person. I go on the street, some white person's telling me, let's just make it simple, okay? Some white person is being racist towards me, calls me the N-word. For me, I don't care. I cross the street, I go in my own way. It doesn't impact me, it doesn't make me angry. Let's say some white person calls another black person the N-word. that person starts, hey, F you, blah, blah, starts yelling at the person, starts getting angry at the person. But the white person called me an N-word. I didn't react. The white person calls someone else an N-word. They get really mad. The same situation, different person. Why is there that difference? Because maybe for me, I don't expect anything from a white person. I don't have that expectation that I will be given respect from a random white person. But maybe for another person, they have that expectation that they will be given respect wherever they are. And so when it's the expectation. So let's go back to my friend. My friend disrespects me. I have the my friend, let's go back to the friend. My friend disrespects me. I'm not angry because they disrespected me. I'm angry because I had the expectation that they would respect me and then they didn't. So it's the expectation that actually is making the suffering, not whatever was said or done. It's the expectation. I have an expectation that you will treat me with kindness, and when you won't treat me, I have an expectation that I will get a raise, and then when I don't get a raise and somebody else is given the raise, I get angry. If I didn't expect to get the raise or I didn't expect that, then I wouldn't be angry when I don't get it, because I didn't have that expectation. The emotion comes, the anger comes because we have an expectation, but that expectation is our own. That expectation is our own. Nobody else is responsible for that expectation. We're responsible for that expectation. Even if I go up to somebody and I say, hey, I'm not going to slap you in the face, you don't have to believe me. You don't have to, why are you bringing this up to me? You don't have to believe me. But if you choose to believe me, then you're agreeing to the terms and conditions of that expectation that exists for you. It's your own responsibility. My expectations are my responsibilities. Your expectations are your responsibilities. Nobody can force me to expect anything. I do that all on my own. So it's not that somebody did something to make me angry. It's that I had the expectation that somebody would act in a certain way and then they didn't. And then because my expectation was not met, then I feel an emotion of anger, of sadness, of whatever it is. So that's anger. Let's talk about shame. Shame is also an attachment, because let's say I have shame over hurting somebody accidentally. Let's say I accidentally hurt somebody with my words or with my actions. If I have shame over the fact that I'm an imperfect person, if I have shame over the fact that I have the ability to hurt people by accident, then me accidentally hurting somebody would make me feel so bad. I would feel so bad that I accidentally hurt somebody. But if I didn't have that shame, then I would just be able to, okay, I move on. I accidentally hurt you. I'm sorry about that. And then it doesn't impact me, and then I don't feel bad. Because so it's that, even like, we think of attachment as I'm attaching to this, I want this, I crave this, I want to have this. But attachment is also, I don't want this, I don't want to have this, I don't want to experience that. That's also attachment. Okay? Going back to the able-bodied and disabled person, the disabled person maybe has no attachment to whether they're in pain or whether they're not in pain in their body, because they experience pain in a different way. They experience it more frequently. Maybe they have less attachment to it. So just because their knee hurts, it doesn't ruin their day. Another able-bodied person, they're used to having a body that doesn't hurt, and they're attached to having a body that doesn't hurt. The second their knee is in pain, they're suffering, miserable for the whole day, for the whole week, for the whole month. So it's the attachment to the thing. Even in aversion is the attachment. The bigger the attachment, the bigger the misery. Bigger the attachment, the bigger the misery, and the more you will suffer. And so going back to death, right? No, let me see. So, it's the attachment that brings you suffering. If you're attached to something, then the second life hits you, the second you can't have that thing, or the second you do experience the thing that you did not want, you're going to be miserable. You're going to be suffering. You're going to be angry. You're going to be all of the things, all of the things. If you are averse to change, you do not want things to change, you're so attached to having your life and things a certain way, the second dysfunction comes, the second things change, you will lose your mind. If you will lose your mind, simply you will lose your mind. You will be dysfunctional and you will lose your mind. And that's no one else's responsibility but your own. My suffering is my responsibility. Nobody, like, my suffering is my responsibility. Your suffering is your responsibility. Your anger is yours. My anger is mine. My sadness is mine. Your sadness is yours. And we need to, okay. When you're attached to something and then you don't get it, or you do get the thing that you don't want, and then you crash out immediately, no, it's nobody else's fault but your own because you're attached. Okay, so what do we do about this? Law of detachment. Let's talk about the law of detachment. Okay, let's talk about it. See, it's very easy, again, to understand things at an intellectual level because humans, we're so smart. We're so smart. We're so intellectual. It's very easy to understand things at an intellectual level, okay? So it's very easy to understand, okay, law of detachment. You detach to something and then you have less suffering. You have less misery around those things. But how do you detach? How do you detach? It's very easy to intellectually understand the law of detachment and the law of impermanence, but how do we actually do that? We need to experience it. We need to experience grief. We need to experience death. We need to experience change. We need to experience endings. No, not even actually. The only way to actually understand the law of impermanence and the law of detachment in a way that is going to change the way that you react to things is not by understanding it intellectually any more than you already do, because intellectually it's a very simple, straightforward concept, honestly. It's about experiencing. It's about the experiential knowledge. And I don't mean experiencing death, experiencing heartbreak, experiencing endings. No, I don't mean experiencing in that way. I mean experiencing detaching from pain, experiencing pain and not being averse to it, experiencing pain without attachment. The experiential knowledge is the only thing that's going to actually teach you the law of detachment. And that is experiencing the fact that things are constantly changing without loving or hating it. Because both love and hate, they're both attachments. Craving, aversion. Experiencing the fact that things are constantly changing without craving and without aversion, without wanting something to be a certain way and without not wanting, like pushing away, without wanting something to be a certain way and also without being averse to the way that things are or the way that things could be, is how we put an end to the attachment. Because when you practice sitting in your discomfort without wanting it to stop, without wanting it to go away, when you practice sitting in your discomfort without wanting it to stop, without wanting it to go away, sitting in your pain, just sitting in it, you are showing yourself, you're showing your body, you're showing your mind that you are strong enough to experience pain and misery without wanting an ending, without searching or waiting for the end of that emotion, of that pain, of that discomfort. That's how you build your capacity for pain. And eventually the pain will go away because nothing is permanent. So when you sit in the pain, and if you're disabled, you probably know this very well, sit in the pain without wanting it to go away, without craving for it to be over, or without hating the fact that it's there, eventually it will go away. Eventually you will no longer be in pain, and it will go away. And once you develop that skill, that capacity, you start tuning your mind. You develop, it's like a muscle. You're doing reps in the gym. Every time you experience an uncomfortable sensation and you just sit in it without wanting it to end, you're doing reps in the gym. Eventually, that uncomfortable sensation will go away. And eventually you will build your capacity, you will grow your capacity for discomfort, for pain. Eventually you'll stop wanting the pain or the discomfort to be over. And when you stop wanting it to be over, eventually it just leaves. Quickly, actually. The quicker it will leave. But you shouldn't do it because you want it to be over quicker. You want to get to that place where quickly it leaves. No, because that's another craving. You do it because you know at the end of the day, it's impermanent. At the end of the day, anicca. Anicca, impermanence, impermanence. This is how you build your capacity for pain, discomfort. This is how you build your ability to detach. And there's really no other way. I mean, if you know another way, you tell me. But really, there's no other way because everything will end and everything will end. Everything will end. Everything will end. And at the end of the day, you are the only person that experiences your feelings. Your feelings are your responsibility, no one else's. And it's not permanent, it's temporary. Anicca.